Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm happy to welcome you at the second conference, a Moscow conference on cybersecurity. I think that's the leading forum in the world, which cover the most and unite the most competent representatives of the industry, of the state authorities, the public. And today we are going to talk about what goes on in cyberspace and how at the level of the national security or corporations or public, we can finally start a dialogue on a very, very important question. And we all realize that the threats in digital sphere and in cybersecurity, whether they are cyber crimes threats or any other threats we will discuss also. Actually, they are challenging the global community. And to be quite candid, I don't see any other more pertinent challenge because we are aware, mostly we are aware as to do with all other threats. But as for this one, we are just reflecting on that. That's what we are going to talk about. My name is Andrei Bezrukov. I'm the president of Association of Experts of Technological Sovereignty. And today with me, I'm having one of the most competent global experts in the field. Let me introduce them. First of all, it's Craig Jones. Craig is cybercrime director in Interpol. Then next to him, I have Alberto Hernandez Moreno, who is CEO of the Spanish National Cybersecurity Institute. Then Leonid Levin, who is the chairman of the State Duma Committee on Information Policy, Information Technologies and Communications in the State Duma of Russian Federation. Michael Galperin, representatives of the Russian Federation at the European Court of Human Rights, Deputy Minister of Justice of the Russian Federation. And at the end of our table, I'm having Dr. Julian Forgem, who is Deputy Research Department of Munich Security Conference. So now you can see those are the people who know exactly what it's all about and has huge experience of this work. I would like to start with Craig. Craig.
One of the institutions that is charged with international coordination and coordination of efforts in fighting cybercrime. Cybercrime is recognized by the World Economic Forum as the number 5 threat right now. Considering that we might have some higher threats like nuclear war, but number 5 is pretty high. And you're dealing with different countries, different issues virtually every day. So tell us, please, what are the barriers that you encounter in your daily job coordinating that effort of fighting cybercrime? And where are we taking from there, from Interpol point of view?
Thank you, Andrei, for the question. Also, many thanks to Sberbank for inviting me here to address at this conference. I'm a newly appointed Director of Cybercrime Programme for Interpol as of May this year. But I can see similar themes throughout my time when I've been working in cybercrime. And the first thing for me is the common language that we use. What is the common language? Cyber attacks, cybercrime, online crime, it's a threat to a country, it's a threat to a nation, but what are we actually talking about? So for me, it's defining the problem, first of all. What is the problem we're trying to address? And then as a community within law enforcement, because obviously now I'm speaking for 194 member countries of Interpol organisation, and I'm leading a global cybercrime programme, which is one of 3 programmes that Interpol lead on. And I'll just mention the other ones briefly: counter-terrorism, organised and emerging crime. Now, those 3 programmes, with my one as cybercrime, form the centre of our work that we're looking to do in Interpol. So how can we coordinate global law enforcement efforts into these programmes? So first of all, internally, we need to coordinate. We need to understand, what are we doing within Interpol? What resources do we have available to us? How does our organisation work? How does our structure work? And then how can we share resources as well? Because when we talk about cybercrime, are we just talking about pure cybercrime, cyber-enabled crime? And when you try and explain that to members of the public or communities, it does get quite confusing, and you try and bring it back to the basic message. For me, I've looked at our cybercrime programme, which developed our strategy in 2016. It's out of date. It was probably out of date the day it was printed. We know this. So how can we be agile in these sort of programmes? How can we interact with partners, with public, with private sector around looking at those threats? And I'll come on to that a little bit later around how we do that. But so the first thing that I've done is actually define what is it we're trying to do. And it might sound simple, but actually what we're looking to do now globally for law enforcement is reduce the global impact of cybercrime and protect communities for a safer world. So everything that I'm doing will come back to that. All the capabilities we're building, how we're working, will come back to that. So when I'm talking at conferences such as this, when I'm talking to my colleagues as well, they can understand that this is what I'm talking to. But also they can challenge back on that as well and say, Craig, we don't understand what you're trying to do. So looking then at our strategy and the way we want to take that forward, for me there's 4 main areas in there. The first one for us is the key, is data, information, intelligence. How do we get that in? How do police do that? We are not equipped. We do not have the resources to look at that data in depth, understand where those threats are coming from, analyse those threats, mitigate them. We need partners to do that. And as part of Interpol's programme, we have a private partner relationship now with proper understanding the way we work with them. And we're taking that towards our General Assembly this year, where that will be made normal practice. So then, as the director of a global programme, I can go and speak with people such as here today with IBM and say, hello, IBM, how can you help us reduce the global impact of cybercrime and protect communities for a safer world? Now, that might sound a little bit naive, but actually, what's the policing purpose? It's around the prevention and detection of crime. And cybercrime is no different. It's just moved into a different space. But it's also about protecting our communities. How can we protect those? Where's the onus on that? Does it come down to the state? Does it come down to us? Because we want that instant access. We want to be able to get online. We want to be able to do things quickly. I was trying to log into TripAdvisor last night to arrange a journey. I had to reset my account, and I was getting really frustrated because I had it on a different account. I couldn't remember that password. So then I couldn't get my trip sorted out by 30 minutes. That frustrated me. But actually, some of those things are put in as measures to protect me, and I need to understand that because I'm a user, I'm a consumer as well, as everybody else is. So just on the coordination side, for me, it is that common language, that common understanding. We're trying to work out what we're doing. At the centre is the data, but I'll come on to the other parts later on in the questions when we go through some of the other areas. I'll let some other people speak now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Craig. I would now ask Alberto to comment on the issue which came up this morning at the plenary session. Alberto represents the National Cyber Security Institute, meaning that he has responsibility over the whole country landscape. And Spain is one of the 38% of countries that actually have cybersecurity policies set up. But many countries don't. And that's, as Craig said, a problem because we don't have a common language, we don't have common instruments. And on top of that, if I can ask Alberto to comment on one issue, is that a private responsibility? Is it a state responsibility? Is a private citizen responsibility? I mean, we have even no consensus on that issue. How can we build a strategy and how can we enforce from, let's say, state point of view or state institution charged with this point of view, some sort of set of rules? What is the Spanish approach to this?
Thank you, Andre. It's a great pleasure to me to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. As Andre said before, I am the CEO of the Spanish National Institute for Cybersecurity, INCIBE. INCIBE is in charge of protecting our citizens and private sector in Spain. And I would like to share with you some statistics and information from the activity of INCIBE. In 2014, we managed more than 18,000 cyber attacks that affected assets in Spain, assets that belong to our citizens and companies. Last year, in 2018, we managed more than 111,000 cyber attacks that affected our citizens and companies. So we know that the number of cyber attacks are growing every year. We know that under the cyber attacks, there are a lot of cybercrime organizations operating on the international level, and we know that we need to collaborate internationally, but also we need to collaborate among the public and private sector. And more than collaborate, we should work together. Together because, from our perspective, the state has a lot of responsibilities in the promotion of the cybersecurity in our country. In fact, in 2013, we approved our national cybersecurity strategy, and we have reviewed it this year, and we have approved a new one last April. So we need to lead the cybersecurity in our country, but we need to do the things in collaboration on working together with the private sectors, because these 111,000 cyber attacks affected our companies, and our companies should work on being protected against cyber attacks. We know that we need to share information, we need to share the knowledge with our citizens and companies, and we need to support the development of capabilities with other countries. In our cybersecurity strategy, we had defined different objectives that we think that are essentials in order to promote the cybersecurity in Spain, but also international context. We have worked a lot on cyber resilience. In fact, we have developed a method for measuring the cyber resilience in our country. For instance, last year, more than 70 main companies, strategic companies in my country, were measured in order to know the level of cyber resilience of these companies. We have developed a national cybersecurity framework for being applied to the public administration. We have established a lot of collaboration agreements and statements with the private sector. We have implemented a lot of cyber exercises, and also we have promoted the culture in cybersecurity in my country. An example of that, we can say that in Spain, almost everybody knows that cybersecurity is important. During the WannaCry crisis, we felt that everybody knew that everybody had to update the systems. Other thing is that probably only few people knows the meaning of update the systems. So we need to improve the awareness among the society, the citizens, and although we know the main companies and the big companies in Spain are protected in a very high level, the small and medium companies need to do a lot of things in the futures. Most of these 111,000 incidents affected to our small and medium companies. So we know that cybersecurity is a challenge, a national challenge, but from the beginning, an international one. We need to collaborate internally in Spain, and we need to collaborate internationally. In fact, in our last cybersecurity strategy, we reflect that international collaboration is essential for promoting the cybersecurity in my country. And as an example of that, during the last 3 years, we are organizing an international training event in Spain in collaboration with the Organization of American States in order to help the other countries to build cybersecurity capabilities. We know that most of the cyber attacks that are affecting our country are coming from other countries, from Latin American countries, but from Asian countries, African countries. So we need to work in the international context in order to protect our national assets. In this event that is organizing during the last 2 weeks in the month of July, we can train people from many countries. Last year, more than 350 people from 43 countries attending this free of charge training event in order to have the latest information about the cybersecurity trends, but also this is important. This is an important initiative in order to reinforce the collaboration among the different countries. Professionals from the justice, judges, prosecutors, but professionals from the law enforcement agencies and also professionals from the technical expertise are essentials in order to protect our national assets, but also the international assets.
Alberto, thank you very, very much. I'll make a couple of remarks. You mentioned a couple of very important words. First is resilience at the national level, and second is culture. So the culture comes with resilience, and without a culture of understanding, there's no possibility to build resilience. Я перейду на русский. Alberto.
I'm getting over to Russian. Alberto mentioned two very important words, and I would like to continue our dialogue taking these two important words.
Страны.
Resilience of the country, and on the other hand, the culture of working with threats in cyberspace. And my question, that is why I'm addressing this question to Mikhail Galperin, who knows a lot about this. Well, Mikhail, looking at our regulation process in the area of norms and laws, legal framework, it's not perfect. It's not always perfect. What can be done in order to raise this the awareness in the understanding of these threats, especially for people who are responsible legislators, and what can be done to create common culture of understanding what is stable, how country can be stable in terms of cyber threats. Thank you so much. Well, our moderator called me an expert in cybersecurity, but as all lawyers in the whole, I would call myself a victim of cybersecurity, cyber crime, because we're not only fighting with this, but also we see that the legislation is suffering from this. The first point, trying to ask the question by a moderator, or what technical infrastructure things can give us the right to provide cybersecurity. Of course, interaction of law enforcement agencies across countries, and a lot must be done here, and a lot should be done. We are at the beginning of this path. And the legal, assistance among countries is not so perfect. We are working in line with some traditional things, but the number of bilateral agreements is limited, and very often they don't work. And it's clear that now we need a global international convention with clear-cut lawful channels for the interaction among law enforcement agencies. Of course, we have some results and success in the area, and lawyers are trying to be in line with new technologies. On May 27, the State Duma ratified the second protocol to the European Convention by the Council of Europe on the legal assistance in the area. This document allows to do a lot of things. Common investigation, extraterritorially speaking, and also the possibility to have video conferencing in investigating a crime. And it's clear that we understand where we are going, but we need the will of many countries to do so. Well, switching from technical question, I'd like to say a few words on how cybersecurity, what are the challenges to the legal system. There are various cyber crimes when ordinary person is asked what is cyber security. Okay, it's embezzlement or theft of the money from private accounts or pornography, etc., etc. But the crimes which are important for us, serious crimes, by the way. For example, falsification of electronic evidence. And this falsification of evidence, since all the information now is in e-version, and courts face this necessity to verify the source of the evidence. We know that for hundreds of years, courts just read the documents and examined the gun and etc. But now they are facing something new. They cannot see this evidence by their own eyes, which are evidence going through the e-resources on the internet, websites, etc., which requires new approach, especially for international courts. We don't want to be a victim to fake evidence, not only fake news, but also fake evidence. And summing up, what the Russian Federation is facing now in a number of international processes is unprecedented, but it's only a beginning. And in European Court of Human Rights and etc. was an unprecedented fake evidences, falsified evidence of various qualities. And the aim here to shift responsibility to our country, and Russia is on the front line of this war against fake evidence. But anyway, I am sure that from this battle, not only the future of many countries depends, but also we should help international courts to form sincere, open, transparent assessment of evidence in order to keep this trust towards international legal system. I'm sure that together we can do so. And the last thing, when I was learning, studying in the university, well, why there are no evidences in procedural codes? Well, if we need them, why don't we have them in writing? But the question is that it's not enough to write what is evidence, because international lawyers should write the standards how courts should analyze such electronic evidence. This is a challenge for us, and our aim must be to overcome this challenge. It's our common task. And whether we address this question or not, we will really might change our future. Thank you. Thank you, Mikhail.
Dr. Vozh. And let me shift the focus a little bit. Dr. Vozh represents Munich Security Conference. And here in English, our panel touches on the issues of national security. National security is a very complex domain if we talk about cybercrime, because now, a few days ago, by a member of Russian Security Council, we've been told that we coming into the era of technological wars and technological terrorism. And it's quite a new phenomenon. On one side, we have cyber criminals who are after the money. On the other side, we have people who are not after the money and who are completely dedicated either to ideological cause or simply they represent a state. And on top of all problems that we already have, we see right now the divisions. We have seen already cyber walls coming up. We see blocks developing when different countries start opposing each other, including actively in the cyberspace. We have threats of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. So what do we do? What's the way out of this? Yeah. I understand it's a very heavy question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to actually be here to be able to speak. Of course, if I had the answer, probably the Munich Security Conference wouldn't have to be anymore, because we wouldn't have any conflicts anymore. Sadly, as it is, I don't have the one, so to say, silver bullet for this as an answer. But the points, the topics you pointed out,
silver rocket, maybe.
Yeah, silver rocket. Yeah, for a big solution for a big question. The points you made go directly in the direction we are facing as the Munich Security Conference, as a platform which wants to facilitate dialogue. The first one you pointed out, which I always summarize as a great equalizer. The type of conflicts, as we all know, have changed, but also, and that is, in my perspective, coming from the Munich Security Conference, a very important point, that the monopoly of power of the state, which it once had, is gone, basically, which in a way, a great equalizer becomes a threat, because we were facing terrorists before, but still the tank could at least, the state could at least see who was buying a tank, basically, to do damage, and now we are in a situation where a malevolent actor, whatever his or her aim is, can pretty much easily acquire a weapon which can do great damage to the whole of the state. So we are in a state right now where the monopoly of the state isn't there anymore. And that again brings up the question that you pointed out: how do we solve that? As the Munich Security Conference, the step we are taking is, as being the facilitators, looking at transnational threats as not a new phenomena, but a phenomena the security policy regime should focus on. We're presenting a report next week, actually, in Nigeria, in Abuja, which focuses on transnational threats. And that brings me to the second point, which I see. The first point is, as I said, the new threats are a great equalizer. Everybody can get weapons which do a lot of damage. We do need translators, and that, again, is the focus for us to, as a platform, translators from the tech world to the, if you want to say, political side of the spectrum. And you can also combine that by saying from the government side to the private sector. Those were already points touched upon by the other colleagues being here. And that is often what we see at the conference, that we for example, we did a summit in Tallinn last year, where we have a lot of people in the room trying to speak to each other, but they live in different worlds sometimes, in the tech world and in the governmental world, if you want so. And that's the thing, we need to build those bridges, and we need translators in that realm to actually, translate not only the threat, but also obviously a constructive side, and see how do we move out of this situation. And that brings me to the third and last point, where we can maybe touch upon the discussion afterwards, that obviously as a platform we look for facilitating dialogue, or how we call it habitats of cooperation, to build those. And the positive note, I think, is there are already constructive efforts going on to actually facilitate this dialogue and create those habitats of cooperation. The one which comes up in mind, and Mr. Storbeck, you touched upon the Budapest Convention being already there, being old, so to say, but already being there, which was picked up at the Paris Forum in December 2018, last year, initiated by Macron, but still trying to push forward to say, and based on this Budapest memorandum, we have to work on and create more cooperative rules in this cyberspace realm. And that's my last point, coming up now in November in Berlin, actually, it's the International Governance Forum of the United Nations, IGF, the short version, where the MSC, Munich Security Conference, are also going to cooperate. And the IGF, it does see itself as a bottom-up way to facilitating, including NGOs, civil society, but also state actors, and also parts of the industry to get into the dialogue and start setting rules, which then could be in a constructive way, help everybody in the cyber realm. So that as a first take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. Now I would like to go into another issue which is very important for our discussion. Я хотел бы попросить...
I would like to give the floor to Leonid Levin, who is one of the most important players in terms of policy, information policy in Russia. Leonid, we understand perfectly well that the world is facing now very serious threats. For example, when we said that some countries adopt laws and doctrines which enable this digital area, to use the digital area as a battlefield. The State Duma adopted law on sovereign internet. As I understand, you have some doubts on this law. So what we should do? What are these doubts? Where is our policy in the State Duma heading for? Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. Andrei, thank you for inviting me to this event, very interesting platform, where we can discuss important decisions made by the government, by the State Duma, and find these common decisions, taking into account the international best expertise. If I start my speech with a reply to a question, I think I should a little bit change your question, maybe modify. We had some doubts to this draft law that you have mentioned, and in its form, it initiated a lot of questions in terms of the communication providers, and in terms of how all the things will be implemented, and in terms of what threats are meant, speaking of safe internet. All these questions were discussed in the State Duma with the participation of businesses and all the interested parties, and we have found the consensus and addressed many questions as we've been battling with. So I'm not going to get into the detail, so-called organizational details. The main thing is that the centralized management of routers can be only when there is a threat to the RUNet, when we have extraneous aspect which can really disrupt the network. So that draft law was not about this creating the sovereign RUNET, Russian net. No, because it's not so. No. Getting back to the subject of our discussion, well, in general, governments of many countries are improving their legal framework counteracting many things like extremism, child pornography, drugs, etc. Some of these questions are under scrutiny and investigation by law enforcement agencies through public associations. Many of you know there's the InHope organization called InHope, which is also active in Russia. Well, what is the evident thing for all of us here is that, well, if in most countries societies are coming to the general understanding of these laws in the internet, why can't we have this legal frameworks, I mean internet legal frameworks in the whole world? And the UN, such suggestions have repeatedly been voiced the platform in the UN, in the forum in Paris last year, when Emmanuel Macron had a very interesting speech on internet regulating, or the Russian resolution on cybersecurity approved by the General Assembly of the UN. And here I'd like to highlight that as of today, internet is regulated by communication platforms, big communication platforms who set the rules for their users. They're trying to limit bad content. And at the same time, the internet users, the number of them is enormous. And even today, in this very hall, we have representatives of many countries, and we should understand that many countries have different perception of things. Take faith, religion, human dignity, respect for state institutions. These questions are perceived differently in many countries, and as a result, users are not satisfied with transnational IT giants, and existing concept for self-regulation in online platform are lagging behind. And at the same time, we hear from top internet giants. They keep saying about the more active role of international regulators and government in regulating global networks. Hence, the necessity to have global regulating body, for example, on the platform of the UN. And yeah, I'd like to, mention about the darknet, this gray zone of the internet. Drug circulation, extremism, and etc. in the real world. In the real world, the Interpol is fighting with all this by coordinating law enforcement agencies of many countries. And why not to use the same principle in the cyber space in order to counteract such criminal activity? Progress is, succeeding. Therefore, we need new approaches, because we are facing, each day we're facing new challenges. Take blockchain, cryptocurrency, biometrics, big data. All these things and their integration in economic processes and systems. Therefore, we need legal framework, international legal framework and rules for networks of force generations that change the world, and now we have new opportunities of new services, video services, and etc. We just get used to them all, let alone car sharing or online shops, etc. All these things are now accessible to us and just easily made. And people now have this habit of trust towards the digitalized world, which attackers use, of course. And today, when we have the million of operations in a second, this allows these attackers to steal finances, to steal money, to disrupt the networks of corporates before this crime is recognized and blocked. A lot of countries are now doing their best to come up with new legal framework, but although there are a lot of appeals to the international community on many forums, the work in this area is too slow. But the number of cybercrime, cyber incidents is growing. And now not individuals and businesses are object of this crime, but also strategic objects, critical infrastructure, telecommunications, state infrastructures. Getting back to the question on regulating, that's why the state, Duma adopted two laws, law on security of critical infrastructure, underlying the responsibility of businesses, and also the law on sustainable RUNET. RUNET meaning safe environment for all users. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that, although the political situation, external political situation is not stable now, the Russian Federation is ready to be part of this whole family of cyber defenders, of legal framework should be improved and optimized, taking into account safety for personal data, for big data, digital identifiers for people, and act proactively, predict potential threats, existential threats, and create tools to counteract hackers. Because ordinary people, should be sure that the state can really defend their interests. Thank you. Well, thank you, Leonid. Now I would like to switch to another part of our session and ask the audience. Maybe we have questions in the audience. Why don't we speak, directly with you? Okay, come on. Please introduce yourself and say whom you are addressing your question. Hello, Sergei Boyko, Center of Information Security, MGIMO. The question to Moreno, Alberto Moreno. In your speech, you three times said about the necessity of cooperation in the area of provision security. Well, just one remark. In 2015, the group of state experts in the UN on international security, they made a report on this problem on security in information space. And this report then it would be presented by the General Secretary to the General Secretary and to all the UN members, and they all approved this report. Let me remind you that this report had recommendations relating to norms and principles of responsible actions of states in information space. 13 key rules were included in the first set of such rules recommended in the resolution 73/27, which was adopted on December 5th, 2018, on the 73rd session of the UN. This resolution has been prepared thanks to the initiative by the Russian Federation. So the question is, Spain voted against this resolution by saying that it's against the rules that it voted for 3 years before in 2015. So the question is, how can we explain the change of the position by Spain? And the second question is, how this position in line with the ideas that you have covered on necessity of cooperation in fighting cybercrime.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. My answer is about this. I don't have the information about the position of Spain in these resolutions, but I can say that in our last cybersecurity strategy, national cybersecurity strategy approved last April, we have included an article and an objective about the need of international cooperation. From the Spanish perspective, cybersecurity is from the beginning an international challenge that needs to have a collaboration framework with other countries, not only in Europe, but worldwide. And some examples of that, I have mentioned one, the Cybersecurity Summer Bootcamp, where Spain is investing a lot of resources in collaboration with the Organization of American States, but also in collaboration with Interpol, Europol, and a lot of companies for improving the cybersecurity capabilities in other countries. Because, as I mentioned before, we understand that for protecting our country, for protecting Spain, we need to have a very strong collaboration links with other countries, because the cyber attacks are coming from other countries. And for doing that, we have to have in place some collaboration agreements, but also we need to invest resources in other countries. To have in place in other countries people well-trained with well capabilities for detecting cyber attacks, for identifying cybercriminal organizations are good news for the Spanish national cybersecurity level.
Спасибо.
Thank you. More questions? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Professor Polikova. I represent the Institute of State and Law of Russian Science Academy of Sciences. My question is that today we're discussing strategy of cyber security and national security. In Russian Federation, we all know that we have a doctrine of information security, which is perceived as a part of national security strategy. So in your perspective, well, everybody speaks more about cybersecurity, but since I am in science and information law, I realize that possibly information security is something wider as an ocean. So we are not talking about that today in our dialogue, though strategies and doctrines, and we studied it in our institute, and we even have grants to study it. So my question is, in your perspective, in the framework of the national security, how cybersecurity and information security match? Well, maybe it's a question to Russian colleagues and possibly to our foreign colleagues. They might provide their own opinion. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I would start speaking about the Russian Federation. I think we here exactly the regulating network. We are at the forefront of all those issues. And quite recently, the State Duma we're now discussing specifics and not only fake news. Everybody's discussing around, and the law was adopted on restricting unconfirmed information, fake news, as everybody calls it. The unreliable information distribution, that's how it is formulated in the law. And we are now not only adopting the law, but it is already applied. And there were 2 cases of its application. Of course, they are only first cases, but we had some events in the town of Dzerzhinsk around an explosion in one of the enterprises, and there were attempts through social media and mass media to distribute some fake information, and there were first attempts to use to apply this to enforce this law there, and there was a repeated case, and the law which speaks about restricting distribution of false information and interaction of companies which own those mass social media. And I hope that fake news at some point, of course, when is going to be reviewed as equal to all other threats, security threats, and the focus mostly related to cybersecurity. Well, I think it was the moderator who identified it at the beginning, and I would agree with you that the national security issues are in the sphere of information too, because the influence or of distribution of information might lead to very serious cases and incidents, no less than the financial threats or anything like that. Thank you.
So one word from you.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I'd even make the topic more complex by saying information is obviously also data. And then if you look, we touched upon the topic of resilience and culture, and the use of data, which is information too, is a huge topic. We had this one case which is kind of telling using Strava, which is a sports app where you can upload your running maps and so on. And there was data which was publicly accessible. It showed where U.S. military bases were, because you could see the soldiers taking the running routes on sites which were actually hidden. So that's the use of data, which wasn't forbidden data, which was still out there, still information out there. So the user, him or herself, also has to choose, which data, what to do with his or her data, and that makes things even more complex in this world. If you see data being used by an individual, but still having an important impact on national security, so that is the thing. We also have to discuss about, and at least say where should the boundaries be, and how can we take the private sector into that. So just to add that.
Julian, thank you very much. We have 5 minutes left, so I would like to provoke my panelists with one question. Imagine that each of you has the authority of the president of the world. What would be the 2 measures you would undertake to solve the problem we're discussing? Just really sharp to the point, 2 things, each of you. Craig, first.
I think working for Interpol, it's about law enforcement and investigation and coordination. I think from a political side of things, as a president, I wouldn't be given that honour through Interpol. So for me, I would look at it from the point of view of what are we looking to achieve from Interpol, and that is around the coordination. And we do a lot of talking about it. We do a lot of writing about it, but actually what are our operational outcomes? That's what I'll be looking for as the first thing for me, and I'll just stick at 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Alberto?
Yes, from my point of view, I think that we agree that probably the most important impact when we are talking about cybercrime is the probability of losing human lives. So this is because we are working on protecting critical infrastructures. We are working on protecting our assets against cyber terrorism, cyber war, and cyber attacks in general. But we should not forget that our citizens are suffering a lot of problems related to cybersecurity. 2 examples of that are cyberbullying and sexting. And we know that in Spain, but in other countries, we are losing human lives due to this type of problems. So if I am the president of the world, probably I will work on promoting the culture in cybersecurity among the citizens. We will promote social values among our young people in the schools and universities. And the second measures will be about to create an international framework with industry, with the public entities, with the NGOs, and with the social entities in general in order to work together against cybercrime. Thank you.
Leonid.
Leonid, you now the president of the world. 2 things you would do. I don't think I am the president of the world. I'm only a representative. I don't think I should be here an exception from the other participants. But politically speaking, extremely important, I think, is to say that between the discussion of the executive power and authorities, well, you should understand what is expected of politicians, specific actions, and not talking. And we should focus on some specific steps to undertake in the interest of the society. And needless to say, we should create opportunities for us to be able, well, as I said in my speech, and no doubt starting from combating extremism, drugs, child pornography, and other, there should be very clear-cut international framework. And all countries of the world should be react to investigate for the cross-border character. Well, if not to be an obstacle, for the cyber criminals and for the states to be able to react fast and prevent cyber crime. Well, translating into Russian, I would say, I mean that we should do our best for internet offshores to disappear. I think that's the new statement I would bring in. For people to realize that getting from one domain to another, they would still be detected and punished. So combating and fighting offshores, that's, I think, the main international challenge we have to solve in cyber security, information security fields, and the rest. I think that's the main lacune and the main challenge today, and something we can, for the people of the world to evaluate. So, Michael, thank you very much. But I think you should not be the president of the world, but maybe the Wizard of Oz to solve all those problems we are discussing. If I were the wizard, I think the important thing to do is for us all to realize that cyber crime and using using cyberspace for crimes should have zero tolerance, because the mankind exists for a long time, and piracy existed for a long time, and some states even tried to use it against each other. But finally, everybody realized that by the end of the day, it's a boomerang. So you don't have to think that if bad guys are working for you, it doesn't mean that they will not work against you at some point. And you have to realize that if you, and I agree with Leonid here, that yes, the global space, the global community should treat similarly and not try to use it for own benefit, because it only boils down to something very bad for those who use those instruments and cyberspace for their own interests. And I think for us to understand each other better and to understand the threats similarly that faces, that's what I think I would try to do. Thank you very much for to the moderator for very interesting questions and a very good discussion that I think took place here. Thank you very much, Michael.
And so you are, because I have to be the president, right? I'll just pick up actually on the part you just made with the part of understanding. If you look at what is the most fertile ground for actors who want to do damage, it's black spots which are out there, which different countries don't talk about. So coming from the idealistic MSC and saying that dialogue is obviously the most important thing, and I would say, for all of our security policy right now, that I would enforce a law of saying everybody has to step in and get into dialogue and talk about those frameworks you just pointed out and create them. And in the next step, that would be data sharing for one of the solutions to not give those black spots out there and those fertile grounds for people who want to do damage to our states and people, a ground to grow. So that would be my two rules.
Microphone? Microphone, please. Microphone. So, well, to recap, I would say that especially the last comments from our panelists are the evidence not of the fact that we are lacking some technical means or that we will have to invent some machine of artificial intelligence to catch criminals. That's something very human: coordination, understanding, laws, the rules of the game, and what was mentioned about internet offshores and piracy. Well, it's hacking. Actually, it's piracy. Hackers, well, they existed 300 years ago. They just hacked something very different. So the dialogue we started today, well, without it, it will be impossible to coordinate or set the rules of the game, or, like we already discussed, or eliminating the borders. And what happens here in this space for the second year running goes in this very direction. And I would like to agree with the speakers that what we are doing today, of course, is very important. Through human dialogue, through mutual understanding and creating those rules of the games is the way for us to reach the goal to make our cyberspace free from threats that are looming over us. And I would like to say thank you to our panelists and also our audience and our participants for attention and for attendance, that you didn't run away from here, and to wish you a great continuation of the conference. Thank you.